Hey everybody, DJ Neeks here, and welcome back to one of my low quality movie reviews. Yeah. um, yeah. How do I even start this? Welcome to my attempt at doing a review slash discussion um, of Avengers Endgame, which will include spoilers. This is a huge warning to all of you. A huge spoiler warning. If you have not seen Avengers Endgame, if you are holding off, or, if you haven't seen it and you don't want to get spoiled for the movie, don't watch this. Stop right now, pause and leave, change another video, something. Just stop watching this, okay? If you've seen the movie and you want to hear, spoilers and you want to discuss or whatever in the comments, by all means stick around. Have no idea how much of this I'm going to cover. How it's going to be based on my memory. I saw it again last night to kind of refresh it in my memory. To try my best to discuss the film as best I can. I'll try to remember to actually play a bit with what you're seeing on the screen, which is basically the Texas Hold'em poker game, because I learned long ago that I can't really play something and constantly be active with the game if I want to fully concentrate on discussing the movie, because I'm trying to recap it because I don't really have any notes. I didn't want to be that guy who opens his phone in the theater and takes notes down about the movie. So I'm doing this straight from memory, just straight from memory, which is why I wanted to see it again a second time in order to kind of really help. Fortunately, there are videos out there of people kind of like giving little bullet points on certain parts of the movie, because it was it's those videos where it catches the audio of the audience reactions, which the first time I saw this, I did not have a good crowd. They were not active at all. Not really. At least it didn't seem like it. Last night when I saw it a second time, much better crowd. Much better crowd that reacted to everything I thought they were going to react to. And there are some moments in this that are just like, you just want to jump up and cheer, just awesome. I do want to point this out though. Don't see this in 3D. It's a waste of money. So the first time we saw it regular showing because I was with my dad. And then when I saw it last night by myself. So there's two theaters nearby in my area. One is a regular theater we go to that has reserved seating and recliner seats. It only has 16 auditoriums, doesn't have an IMAX, but it's still really nice. This other one does have a quote-unquote IMAX, though I disagree, because I used to work at another theater in this area that did have what I considered a legit IMAX theater. I mean, that sucker was huge, and I worked in that theater for 4 years, so I just laugh whenever I go to this one here, and they say, it's an IMAX here. I'm like, no, it's not. But as far as I'm concerned, because it was an IMAX 3D showing, it was $20 a ticket. Don't see it in 3D. It's a waste of money. The 3D added literally nothing to the film. All it really added was a headache. All it does, it's headache inducing. Ugh, man. So my head was not exactly all that great. There were times I just watched without the glasses on. That was, we've moved into spoiler territory now, so you've been warned. It was also because I was tearing up, and you can probably understand why. So, yeah, don't see it in 3D. If you can see it in a real legit IMAX theater, by all means, but don't see it in 3D. So the movie I was expecting. Look, we had a cold opening in Infinity War. We had the whole, Marvel Studios intro, but it was with the distress signal in the background. So there was no actual, big fanfare, because it was setting the tone. Right off the bat, the tone is set in this one as well. We know what's happened, and we know what's going on, what we're dealing with. And the movie started where I thought they were going to go, because everyone kept joking and, cracking up about Infinity War, saying, "Where's Hawkeye in all this? What happened to Hawkeye? What's Hawkeye doing? What was he doing during this whole thing?" Well, we see exactly what he was doing. He was on the farm with his family with the ankle bracelet showing that he was under house arrest, like they said he was, teaching his daughter how to shoot a bow and arrow, while the rest of his family was making a barbecue. And then when he's distracted, when he's looking away, that happened. And you don't... What I loved about this scene was the cinematography of it. We saw what he saw. We didn't get to see his family vanish. We saw what he saw, which is he never saw it. He turned away for a moment, and when he looked back, she wasn't there anymore, his daughter. Now, we noticed the little pieces of dust floating away, but he doesn't know that was his daughter. He has no idea what's been going on involving Thanos and the Infinity Stones. Now, I knew it was coming, so I was bracing myself for it, because of course it was going to happen. But I think some people weren't prepared for that, because I heard some audible, gasps in the theater when that happened. And then, as he's wondering where his daughter is, we then have another shot back out to the field where his family was making the barbecue, and now they're not there. They're gone now. And he looks over and he doesn't see anyone, and he starts to... Jeremy Renner, may I just say, give that man some credit for the acting in that scene, because he slowly started to escalate, in terms of his worry and his wondering of what's going on, to starting to panic. I thought he handled the acting of that scene very well. The timeline of this movie was fascinating, because some people thought the whole movie was building up to us going to get Thanos. I'm like, that doesn't really sound right, because why would they wait that long? Now, I had heard the movie was going to take place either 5 months or 5 years or whatever. There's rumors all over about how much time was going to pass of them dealing with the snap. And I believe they said a few weeks. Now, as I expected, the trailer was pretty much the first, the portion before the title card. That's pretty much what the trailer was. Everything in the trailers was essentially in the first section before the title card popped up. Almost. But yeah, it showed Stark and Nebula. He's teaching her to play paper football. And then it jumps to him making that message in the trailer. And he quickly establishes, it's been some time. Some fuel cells were damaged during the battle with Thanos. We tried to fix it. Couldn't really fix it, but it bought us some time. Food and water ran out for both of us. Oxygen will run out. And then Captain Marvel shows up. Now, some people have had a problem with how did Captain Marvel find them out in the middle of nowhere. It wasn't entirely obvious, but where Tony Stark was sitting in the pilot seat just resting, I did notice a blinking purple light. It was very slowly blinking, but it was still blinking. And it's not hard for me to believe that Rocket had some kind of, tracker or something. I mean, that's, you could say, look, it's his car. He would be like, look, I can just go to this thing and be like, oh, look, that's where my car is located. Let's go get it. It's not hard at all for me to believe that that's what would have happened involving the Guardian ship and Captain Marvel somehow finding it. That Rocket would have been like, all right, looks like my ship is over there, and then she would go and grab it to save them. So, not hard for me to believe at all. What I loved seeing, though, was that Pepper survived. Because we all speculated what her fate was with the snap. She was spared. And the next scene is a powerful scene. And is one of those scenes that it kind of makes you cringe, but for the right reasons. Because Stark starts to have a bit of a breakdown. because he is of the mindset that we lost. There's nothing we can do. We lost. Of course, Steve and the others are like, no, there's got to be something we can do. There's still got to be something we can do. And he's like, there is nothing more we can do. We tried and we failed. And he actually recaps the thing that I didn't like back in Age of Ultron. If there was one thing I didn't like about Age of Ultron, because I do still like that, because I do like that movie, even though a lot of people don't like it. But when they're arguing about how they were going to go about it, and Tony was like, well, how are we going to do this? And Steve says, together. And he goes, we'll lose. And he goes, well, we'll do that together too. And I thought, well, that's not very fair to everybody else, that you're just going to accept losing just because, well, we lost, but hey, at least we lost together, so that's what matters. And Tony's like, yeah, guess what? It didn't. And you weren't there. So we didn't lose together, like you said. And he just starts having this breakdown where he is just done. He is a broken man who is done. And in some ways, I wasn't surprised. But what I love about it was that it was Robert Downey Jr., I think, bringing out a bit of him of his personal life, who knows what it's like to be at that point in his own personal life. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm saying that is him having been at that point in his life and actually knowing where he would be, like, mentally, like what kind of state he'd be in, based on how Stark was, because he was kind of dealing with the fact that he had not had much to eat or drink recently. He was starting to run out of oxygen. You could see he was like on, he was like, they were trying to medically keep him going, stable. And he just starts to have a breakdown, and he collapses after he rips off the arc reactor, and he's like, here, you use it, you take it, and you hide, like you have been. Like he's like, really just pissed at Steve at this point, where he's just done. And then they decide, because Captain Marvel's there, she's like, all right, I'm going to go kill Thanos. And then they're like, oh, hold on. We're going to go do this together. And, Steve drops the, let's go get this such and such. And then the title card pops up. And I'm like, oh, that's all before the title card. Okay, then. And then they go to that garden that he went to at the end of Infinity War. And they find out that he used the stones one more time, but he used them to destroy them, to ensure that they could not undo what he did. And then Thor chops his head off, because as he says, he went for the head. I believe they said it's been a few weeks or so since the snap to that point in the movie. So for a few weeks, Thor had to just sit on that, stir over that, believing that it was his fault that the snap happened. And then a cut that I don't know how many people actually were expecting it or not. 5. And it didn't just show all at once. It slowly showed one word at a time, which was brilliant to give the magnitude of what this was saying. 5 years later. 5 years. Let me really try and hammer this point home, because this really has to be understood. We're talking 5 years with half of the population gone. Take a moment to consider what the consequences of something like that would do. The devastation. The economy. Just the natural results of what people would do with that kind of knowledge, that revelation, that kind of tragedy. They show shots of New York, and it looks like it's a post-apocalypse world. It looks like it's something out of, I don't know, The Walking Dead or something. Like, it shows the baseball stadium where the Mets play. It's not Shea Stadium anymore. It's the new one. Forgive me, I forget what that stadium's called. But, I mean, I thought this was important that they had to show this, though. They had to address this. Having to live with and deal with the consequences of failing to stop Thanos, of seeing what would happen as a result. How would everyone cope with this? And yeah, they're having classes. Like, Steve is giving classes on how to move on with this, how to cope with this, because this is not something that's easy to cope with, to deal with. I mean, he's has his mask on because he's Captain America. He has to be that one wearing a mask for everyone else to look up to and be like, for everyone to look at him and feel like they have him to look up to in order to how to deal with all this. When inside, he hasn't moved on at all. Yeah. Natasha, sorry, Black Widow, I'll just say Black Widow, just to make it easier. But they kept calling her Nat. So it got kind of stuck in my head. Black Widow, she's kind of running like a defense group for them to kind of keep an eye on certain things, to watch over, to deal with all this. But the moment everyone leaves the room, she breaks down. She is barely holding it together. The only thing that's like keeping her in somewhat of a one piece is those tasks on trying to defend this, watch over this. Because if she doesn't have that, she's just like, she's broken. Like, she's like, you just see it. She's mentally just like emotionally breaking down. Until she realizes Steve's in the room, and then she puts her mask back on. But, I mean, even they confide in each other that, yeah, neither of them have moved on, and they're both hardly figuring out a way to deal with all this. And then we get to one of the more important things of the movie, which is also kind of humorous, because I kept wondering, how were they going to explain this? Because I was under the impression that there was no way for Scott to get out of the quantum realm without someone else there to bring him out, to push the buttons to bring him out. Otherwise, he's stuck. He can't just on his own. And lo and behold, I've seen some funny jokes about this. A rat, because the van has been impounded. They apparently found the van atop a building, and they put it in an impound lot. I'm guessing that was an impound lot. It was a storage lot, I guess. It was like a self-storage place. I don't know. A rat walks over the console and hits the buttons and turns it on. I saw some people joke that was actually Splinter from the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and then we're going to get an Avengers Ninja Turtles crossover. I thought that was really funny. But, yeah, the rat turns the machine on, and Scott comes out of the quantum realm. Now, this is not addressed immediately, but he's like, what the heck happened? Because it hasn't been 5 years for him. But I'll get to that in a second. So, he's running around trying to figure out what happened to the world around him. So, he's in San Francisco, and he's like walking through with this little wagon of stuff. And he comes to an area inside of the Golden Gate Bridge where there are these big, like, pillars of stone. And then you realize those are memorials to those who vanished. And he starts to panic because he starts to worry that his daughter is on one of those. And he's searching the names, looking for his last name. And he finds his name. And he's like, what? So he goes to his house, hoping to find her, and he does. But she's 5 years older now. And the look on her face, because she is seeing her father for the first time in 5 years, who she thought was dead. And she starts to lose it. That got me. And Scott is in shock because he says this later. It hasn't been 5 years for him. It's been 5 hours. For him, only 5 hours passed while he was in the quantum realm. And he comes back and his daughter is 5 years older. She's a teenager now. And he's never going to get those 5 years back. This is something that some people have said didn't bother them about where the movie eventually ends up because the consequences remained. The 5 years that were lost by Scott with his daughter, the 5 years of dealing with all this and grieving, that all stayed. That didn't change. There were consequences that were still paid. They didn't just undo everything and bring everyone back and, oh, look, nothing happened. No, the consequences stayed. Anyway. So Scott makes his way to the Avengers facility, and that's where we see the shot where he's like, hey, I'm Scott Lang. You guys remember me? I'm Ant-Man. And Cap and Nat are just in shock because they thought he was gone. And they let him in, and he's like, just kind of like mulling over all this in his mind because he can't stop thinking about what's going on here and the possibilities of what this means. And that's when he tells him, guys, it's been 5 years for you, but for me it was 5 hours. And that's when he says, time works differently in the quantum realm, but there's no way to navigate it. But what if we were somehow able to find a way to do that? And that's what leads to our time travel stuff, and that's when this becomes the time travel movie. Now, let me just say, this is not an amazing, perfect movie, okay? It has its flaws, and some of its flaws are in the time traveling, but they do kind of address some of them by the end of the film, while at the same time not entirely addressing all of them. Some of them do kind of remain unanswered. But this is where the time travel stuff kind of starts to make, have the flaws of this movie show up. It's still a phenomenal movie, but the time travel stuff does add some flaws to it, which usually anytime you're going to introduce time travel into this, that's usually going to end up being the case. I also love the fact that they just straight up addressed time travel in other works of fiction. They just start listing them off. Star Trek, Terminator. They list off some other movies as well, like Hot Tub Time Machine. They also say that Back to the Future is just straight up BS. Now, I love Back to the Future. It's one of my favorite movie sagas of all time. I absolutely adore Back to the Future. But I'm not going to disagree that the science behind it is kind of BS. Especially when the smart guys in this movie, Tony Stark and Bruce Banner, are the ones straight up saying, yeah, it's complete BS. I just thought that was incredibly hilarious that they just straight up called it out for that. That was really funny. Gotta keep my throat hydrated. Got a lot of talking here. So they attempt time travel. Although before that, something else important happens. So to discuss the possibility of this actually working, they try to go find Tony. Now remember, I said that at the beginning of this, he was a broken man. 5 years later, he has been able to recover and find a new aspect of his life to move on and carry on. Because he and Pepper did get married, and they had a daughter. And she is adorable. She is so cute. Ugh. And it's just so sweet seeing Tony with a little girl, with his daughter. Seeing that that's where he's at now in his life, being a father. And it's so sweet. And they start discussing with him, and he's like, you do realize this is absurd what you're discussing, right? It's laughable. What happened to you was a complete fluke. The odds of this actually working are completely ridiculous. And so they try to go talk to Banner about it. Now, they did something with Banner I did not expect. It threw me for a loop when I saw it. But apparently this has actually happened in the comics. Professor Hulk. Now, This was a little awkward because it was Hulk's body, but it was Banner. His personality, his mind, everything. So he was like, no, it's the best of both worlds. I get to keep my brain, I get to keep the Hulk's brawn. And I'm like, okay, but what happened to Hulk? Like, the personality, Hulk, you know. Urgh, smash! Is he just gone? Is he just kind of kept prisoner in the brain of Banner? What? He didn't really explain that. So, I don't know. But it was kind of funny, just kind of seeing him throughout the movie as the Hulk, you know, but it's Banner, you know. So, they get Banner on board to attempt the time travel. But, of course, Banner, his expertise is not in terms of quantum physics and time traveling, so he doesn't really know what he's doing. So, Scott goes through a bit of a odd phase during this experimentation where he comes back as a teenager, then he comes back as an old man, he comes back as a baby, and then they bring him back and he's like, someone peed my pants. And then Stark shows up and goes, aw, why long face? Let me guess, he turned into a baby. And so Tony basically, yeah, so after they left his house, Tony is kind of like stewing over this, debating it back and forth in his head because he sees the picture of him with Peter Parker. And that gets to him. And so he experiments with it. He's like, yeah, Friday, I got some inspiration on something. Can we try it out? And it works. It works. Tony Stark solved how to do time travel. He figured it out. But he's wondering if he should go with it because he's worried he's going to lose what he has now. We've seen it. Excuse me. We've seen it. We've seen it in movies like Back to the Future. The risk that you fix everything, but you also lose what you got, what you gained. He's worried if they fix everything, he'll lose his daughter. And he straight up says, Steve, if we can bring everyone back, that's great, but I can't lose what I gained. I cannot lose the last 5 years. And Steve was like, it's a deal. So, they pretty much then execute or start to work on the plan of what we are going to do is we are going to go back in time to certain points in time. We're going to grab the Infinity Stones, bring them to our time, snap them, and bring everyone back, and then go back in time and put them back where they were so it doesn't mess up the time flow. Because if you remove them, a lot of bad alternate reality stuff could happen. This is even said later on by one of the characters that they encounter. So this was great nostalgia and fan service because we got to see the Battle of New York from the first Avengers again. That was great. We got to see the aftermath of what happened with getting Loki. This had some great moments. Them talking about Captain America's butt in the suit. That's America's. You know. Oh, that was great. Cap having a mirror match with himself, with the other thinking that he was Loki. That was great. Him getting the scepter from the Hydra guys, because it's the guys we thought were S.H.I.E.L.D., but turns out we're Hydra, and he convinces them to give him the scepter by telling them, "Hail Hydra." And then he just walks out of the elevator with it, because they're like, "Oh, okay, here you go." They tried to get the Tesseract. They're nearly successful by causing Tony to have a heart attack. Past Tony, not present Tony. To present Tony, stand by. Medic! You need some help. He tries to walk away with the Tesseract, but then Hulk, who they told to take the stairs, so many stairs. He smashes through and smashes Tony. Loki sees the Tesseract slide to his feet. He bends down while no one's looking, grabs it, and uses it to teleport out. Now, this causes possibly a number of issues in terms of the time traveling stuff. This is what I was talking about in terms of the flaws. This is never really addressed later on. Some people have joked that this is him, teleporting away to his new show. Apparently, he's going to get his own spin-off TV show. Sure. I don't think I'm going to be watching it. I gave up on S.H.I.E.L.D., Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. pretty quickly. Not that I didn't like it, it just really wasn't working for me. Plus, I have fallen behind on a lot of shows. Like, I hardly have any time to actually sit down and watch TV anymore. Outside of perhaps ordering them, like, digitally and just watching them on my phone or something like that. But anyway. Oh, excuse me. Throat's starting to get a little sore here. They went to Asgard, Thor and Rocket, to get the ether from Jane, which I guess, I don't know if Natalie Portman came back or not. Didn't really matter. Could have been old footage. Could have been her coming to terms with them and coming back. Whatever. Actually, I should address something real quick before I mention the rest of the scene. Thor. Yeah. I'm so mixed on what they did with Thor in this movie. I think, how do I say this? See, here's the thing, guys. I'm one of those people who actually likes both Thor, the first movie. I do like that movie. I also, when I rewatched Thor: The Dark World, I was like, it's not that bad. There were things about the movie that I did like. A lot of people think it's a terrible movie. I don't think so. I didn't think it was that bad. And the thing is, when I saw Thor Ragnarok for the first time, I wasn't really enjoying it as much as other people were. And I enjoyed it a lot more the second time I saw it, I will say that. But I think it was just because it was so jarring. It was so, like, to left field from what I was usually expecting from a Thor movie. Like, it didn't feel like a Thor movie. But, I've come to now really like that movie now. But the first time, it was just like, what? And then they had this version of Thor in this movie, which he had a beer belly. The implication is that he's been drinking nonstop for the past 5 years, and he has this giant fat belly now. A beer belly, basically. Rocket says you look like melted ice cream. Tony Stark jokes that he looks like Lebowski, Mr. Lebowski, or the Big Lebowski. I don't really like that. I think it's because I get very turned off by characters who have this, who cares? I don't care about anything, whatever type of attitude. That nothing matters, who cares, I don't care. That's basically the approach he was taking at this point. He didn't care anymore. He wasn't taking anything seriously anymore. He was just wanting to live a carefree life and not care about anything. And I don't like that. I get very turned off by that. I much rather liked and preferred Thor when things were serious and he took them seriously and he got serious. This happens later on in the film, in the third act, for the big finale, but we'll get to that. So anyway, while they're there on Asgard, he sees his mother. And this is huge for him. Because he loved her and missed her. And she immediately knows he's not present Thor. She immediately can tell he's from the future. She says, I was raised by witches, I can tell. I was expecting her to say something like, my goodness, you smell of time travel. You reek of it. I can smell time travel on you. Just like as if she can just sense it. Or in different ways with her different senses. That's just what I was kind of expecting her to say or do, but whatever. So she kind of helps kind of pick him back up, mentally and emotionally. Rocket gets the ether. Before they leave, though, he tests if he's still worthy to wield the weapon. And Mjolnir responds. And he takes Mjolnir with him. Now, I didn't pick this up at first, until later on. And then I was wondering, isn't that supposed to stay? Now, by the end of the movie, it shows that it actually was returned, which is important. Obviously to the whole time travel thing, because I was like, doesn't Thor in the Dark World need that? But it got addressed. The third group was the group that went to space to get the Power Stone and the Soul Stone. This is where things get very interesting. By the way, Tony and Steve go to the 70s to get the Tesseract in a different point in time, while also getting some other Pym particles, because they only had a limited supply left because Hank Pym was snapped away. So they go to a military base to get Pym particles, because Hank Pym in the 70s is there working on stuff, and the Tesseract is there, held by S.H.I.E.L.D., being experimented on. And this is where something happens for both Tony and Steve. Tony runs into his father as his mom is expecting him. Let me rephrase that to make clear what I'm saying. Tony runs into his dad, who tells him that his wife, Tony's mother, is pregnant with Tony at that point in time. And Tony's like, oh. And he gets to have this conversation with his father, which was very, very needed for him. And he really finally gets to have a moment to really, for himself, kind of set things straight with his dad. Because he never really got to do that before. So he finally gets to kind of straight things away with his dad. And, he gives him a hug. Steve sees Agent Carter. And he just freezes. And just thinks about what could have been. And that's touched upon later in the film. Anyway, back to space. So, Nebula and Rhodey are going after the Power Stone. Natasha and Barton are going after the Soul Stone, which I immediately realized, wait a minute. How are they going to get the Soul Stone? And I immediately realized, as soon as I realized the two of them were heading to get the Soul Stone, I knew one of them was going to die. Because I knew one of them was going to have to die to get the Soul Stone. I immediately picked up on that. So, yeah. But before they show that, they show something kind of important. Apparently, Nebula uses a network that, if there's more than one of her in the same timeline, they're connected. Because the Nebula in that timeline, 2014, during Guardians of the Galaxy 1, actually starts accessing memories from the Nebula from our timeline. And starts playing them for Thanos. Just not, willingly, just like, it just starts happening. It's like a glitch in her system. And Thanos immediately starts picking up on what's going on. And he starts accessing all the memories from our Nebula. And he finds out about what happened. That he won. And that he wants to do something involving getting the stones back. So, yeah. Thanos finds out about their little idea. Now, I'll talk about the two different Thanoses in a bit here. So, they get the Power Stone. But, of course, Nebula has her little accident and gets captured. And then we go to Vormir, and as I expected, they are confronted by the Red Skull, who tells them, a soul for a soul. And unlike what happened with Thanos and Gamora, they are each willing to sacrifice themselves to do this. Now, let me just say right now, I was completely expecting, and I know this is horrible to say, but I was also hoping it was going to be Natasha. Many people thought it was going to be Barton. Barton had a family to get back to. Natasha, she's made it clear she didn't even know who her family was. In terms of, like, you know. Because later on, yeah, Steve does say that her family was the Avengers. And that's true. But you guys know what I mean. You guys know what I mean about, you know, the first shot of the movie is Barton on his family's farm with his children and his wife. I did not want to see Natasha have to go there after they were brought back and tell them that that Barton was not coming back. I thought it had to be Natasha. And I figured Natasha thought the same thing. Plus, it just made sense to me the way the movie was going. When I saw Natasha having to try and somehow deal with the past 5 years, the fact that when no one else was in the room, she just started crying. She started bawling. She was hardly holding it together. She was an emotional wreck, but she kept her mask on for everyone. She somewhat did for Steve, but Steve, he knew. And plus, she knew that he knew. So, I was completely expecting it to be Natasha. And I was right. She makes the move to be the one who sacrificed herself so that Barton lives and gets the Soul Stone. So everyone comes back with all the stones except Natasha. And they say, she's not coming back. We can't let it be in vain. So they start working on a glove to wield the stones. Now, I do want to say, it has been 5 years since Thanos snapped his fingers. I would like to think that during those 5 years, Tony did a lot of research and study on the Infinity Gauntlet that the dwarves made, and whether or not he could somehow replicate that kind of technology into one of his own gauntlets. You give Tony Stark 5 years to study and research something, I'm pretty sure he's going to come up with a way to do it. So I can absolutely buy that Tony Stark would have come up with a way to infuse the Infinity Gauntlet's tech with his own Iron Man tech in order to be able to momentarily wield them to snap the fingers. I can buy that. Because you could see Stark was working on it. So they debate who's going to snap their fingers, because keep in mind, snapping the fingers with those gems on someone who's not as powerful as Thanos could kill them. Now, Thor immediately steps forward. And it's not because he's being cocky or arrogant, like, of course I can do it. He's pleading with them. Please let me do it. Please let me do something good. Let me do something right. And that started to get to me. He's so heartbroken over what he's done in the past, his failures, that he's pleading to let him do something right. But it ends up being Hulk because, as Hulk said, it's mainly Gamma. And it's almost like he was made for this. That the Hulk is someone who's strong enough to actually be capable of surviving something like that. Now, it, like with Thanos, it just wrecks his arm. It just burns it, like singes it. By the end of the movie, he's in a cast. The Hulk is in a cast. That's what the stones did to his arm. So he snaps his fingers. During this time, we find out that the Nebula from the past, who is still loyal to Thanos, switched places with our Nebula and has now brought Thanos and his entire warship and his entire forces there. Because before the snap, she sends his ship through time into the sky. And just moments after Hulk snaps his fingers and they think they won, they did it, they brought everyone back, he bombs the place. Absolutely bombs it. It's devastating. And they're trying to find their way out of the rubble and recover. The only one you don't see, and I love this is what I was talking about in regards to Thor. The only one you don't see doing that is Thor. Because from the moment the place is bombed to the next time we see Thor, he's just standing in place outside staring at Thanos. That's the Thor I love. The one who is ready, who is taking things seriously. He's done nothing but watch Thanos since he teleported to the ground. Because Thor, as much as anyone, wants Thanos dead. And he calls upon thunder and lightning, changes his outfit, wields both Stormbreaker and Mjolnir, and says, let's kill him properly this time. And the three of them, Thor, Cap, and Iron Man, confront Thanos. And Thanos gives a very interesting speech. One that I thought was fascinating because of... Do you guys know how many people I've heard over the past year since Infinity War came out have debated on whether or not Thanos was right? There are people I know personally, they thought Thanos was right. That his plan was right. I've heard that there were apparently debate classes or philosophy classes or whatever, that debated whether or not Thanos was right. I'm not exaggerating. This is what I've been told from people I know who were taking classes. That there was actually classes that would debate on whether or not Thanos was right. I bring this up because in this speech, I'm trying to remember exactly how he said it. You couldn't live with your own failure. And where did that bring you? Back to me. I thought by wiping out half of the population that the other half would thrive. But you've shown me that's impossible. And I thought, wow, he just straight up said that he was wrong. That his plan was wrong. All those people who debated over the past year for Thanos in his favor, that he was right, he has now denounced them. He has now said that they were wrong because he was wrong. I'm trying to remember exactly how he said this, but he said something along the lines of, as long as there are those who remember what was, they'll never be willing or allow the other half to know what could be, what can be. I want to thank you, because now I know what I must do. I'm going to eliminate every living atom in this universe. And then with the stones that you have collected for me, I will create a new universe, teeming with life, with an abundance of life. And Cap says, built on blood. And Thanos says, they would never know it. Because you will not be around to remind them. At this point, he has now gone straight up villain. Because he has now decided, I'm now going to... He's basically gone the route of... There's two things that immediately come to my mind when comparing what Thanos is saying he's going to do now. One is Sargeras from World of Warcraft. He has gone the route of Sargeras now, where he's saying, I'm going to wipe the slate clean, the entire universe of life, etch-a-sketch it, and then create a brand new universe. Because this one is completely flawed. So I'm going to make a new one that's much better after I kill everything off. The other that comes to mind is the Reapers from Mass Effect. You know, wiping out life in the universe every 50,000 years so that a brand new universe can try to, thrive and flourish and such. Obviously, it was different in Mass Effect, but I think you get my point. Probably the Sargeras one is the more accurate comparison here, but I hope you guys are getting my point. And so they start to take him on. We see some other stuff happen. We see this, bad Nebula tries to take the stones for Thanos, but good Nebula and Gamora, not our Gamora, the Gamora from the past, stop her. This then leads to one of the most awesome segments of the film. So Thor is fighting Thanos, and then Thanos starts to beat him. In fact, at one point, Thor calls for Stormbreaker, and Thanos grabs it with no problem. I mean, Thanos can wield Stormbreaker. Just wanted to point that out. Then he starts to press it down on Thor to try and kill him, stab him with it, just like Thor did at the end of Infinity War. And then Mjolnir lifts up. Now, at first I thought Thor was calling for it with his other hand. But then it goes back. After it hits Thanos, it gets called back to Cap. Captain America is wielding Mjolnir. A callback to what we saw in Age of Ultron. And Thor says, I knew it! Because he knew! He knew the moment he slightly nudged Mjolnir back in Age of Ultron, he knew that Cap could do it. And I am definitely now of the mindset that, yeah, Cap stopped. It's not that he could slightly nudge it and then couldn't. It's that he stopped. Because he knew he could lift it up, but he didn't want to show up Thor. So he stopped. But now, there's no time for that. We have to stop Thanos. And he starts using Mjolnir to not only swing it around and, combine it with the shield, he also calls down lightning. Captain America, as Odin said back in the first Thor movie, whomsoever holds this hammer, if he be worthy, shall possess the powers of Thor, can now summon lightning. Captain America can now summon lightning with Mjolnir. I thought that was amazing. And so you think, oh, here we go, Cap versus Thanos, and it is awesome. And then Thanos starts beating him. And not only does he start to beat him, he starts to break his shield with, let me just say right now, that weapon Thanos had, that was awesome. And I gotta say, the way Thanos handled that weapon, you know how cool we thought Darth Maul was in The Phantom Menace with his dual-sided lightsaber? I'd say Thanos just gave him a run for his money, because that dual-sided weapon he had in this film was awesome. He was twirling it around like a shield to deflect energy blasts. He was throwing it and then having it come back to him like a boomerang, and he uses it to break Cap's shield. That's impressive. That's very impressive. So he beats Captain America. And then he starts to call his invasion forces. Because he then says another speech that I thought was, okay, there's no playing around anymore. He says, let me see if I can remember exactly what he said. It was something like, of all that I have done, the killing, the violence, the slaughter, it was never personal. But I want you to know right now what I'm about to do to your stubborn, annoying little planet. I'm gonna enjoy it very, very much. He just straight up told us he's going to enjoy slaughtering us. Because, keep in mind, Hulk, which means the other half of the population is back. Meaning he now wants to slaughter everybody. Our entire planet. But then this leads to not only the best scene in the movie, but one of the greatest scenes in motion picture history. In my opinion. Because Hulk, I hope you guys can hear that through my mic, snapped his fingers. That means everyone who got dusted away came back. Because then Cap hears on his comms, Cap, can you hear me? Cap, it's Sam. Can you read me? And then he says, on your left. Which, if you remember Winter Soldier, that's another callback. He turns around, and there are the swirling yellow, glowy lights that Doctor Strange uses to make portals and such. And out comes Black Panther. And Falcon flies out. The other two were with Black Panther, including his sister. I was glad to see that Shuri was okay. That she was back. And then a ton of other portals start to open up as well. And then everyone starts coming back. Doctor Strange comes back. The Guardians come back. Spider-Man comes back. Groot comes back. Bucky comes back. Valkyrie shows up with the Asgardians. Everybody from the Marvel Cinematic Universe comes through. Hope shows up. Scarlet Witch shows up. When I say Hope, I mean Wasp. Just literally everybody we know from all these movies. And one with Doctor Strange just along, is that everyone? And he goes, what, you wanted more? And they start bringing their forces with them. So now we have this giant army on the side of the Avengers. Because at one point, after Thanos gives his speech, his entire invasion force from his ship, his own army, the children of Thanos are all back. All his forces that we saw in the first Avengers movie, New York, they're all back. At one point, it shows just Captain America standing, looking at Thanos' army. And now Cap has this army of Avengers gathering behind him. The music for this scene is amazing. The build-up, the fanfare. This is where people started to lose their minds that were watching this movie in the crowd. They were cheering like crazy, seeing everyone come back. Because this was such an incredible moment for everyone that was a loyal fan of this. And it's just, the music is building it up. Cap turns and he stares at Thanos. And he finally says, Avengers! Assemble. He finally said it. And they all charge. And we get... I used to hold the Battle of Gondor from Return of the King as the standard of movie battles. Of what... the standard of what a gigantic epic battle in a movie has to live up to. This now tops it. That was an amazing battle in Return of the King. This is now the new standard. This was incredible. Seeing everyone from the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the Avengers, the Guardians, the Asgardians, the Wakanda forces, the students from Doctor Strange's school, everybody fight Thanos' army. Ugh. So many things happen, it's hard for me to recap, and I'm starting to... my throat's starting to get a little tired here, and this is already going an hour long, which I kind of thought it was going to be. So I'm going to try and start wrapping this up. So towards the end, Captain Marvel shows up. She wrecks Thanos' ship. She does get a moment to take him on, and while brute force, he doesn't beat her because she just shrugs it off. He outsmarts her by grabbing one of the Power Stone and then using that to beat her. So Thanos was able to actually outsmart her. Now, something else happens here. At one point, Tony asked Doctor Strange, you saw 14 million scenarios and only one of them we won. Is this that one? And Strange says, if I tell you what what happens, it won't happen. And so, after he beats Captain Marvel, Thanos, I mean, Tony is looking at Doctor Strange, and Strange gets this look on his face, this realization, and he looks at Tony, and he's holding his hands up because he's keeping this like tornado going to keep this water from falling on them, and he turns his hand into a 1, telling him, this is it. This is the one. This is the difference right here. This moment right here is where we can have that one scenario that we win. He doesn't tell him what he needs to do or what happens. He just tells him, this is the one. So Tony tries to stop Thanos from snapping his fingers with the Stone's gauntlet because he's going to wipe out everyone, and yeah. And Thanos tries to get off his one-liner saying, I am inevitable. Snaps his fingers. Nothing happens. The stones are not there. He looks at Tony, and Tony has the stones on his own gauntlet. And Tony responds, and I am Iron Man. And Tony snaps his fingers. Thanos' army gets dusted. They are the ones who are now wiped from existence. Thanos is the last to be dusted. And Thanos goes out in a way that not many villains have gone out. You could probably count them on one hand of villains who have died quiet, in silence. Try to think of any villains that have gone out without or shouting or just something, saying something, screaming, yelling, whatever, but instead of just gone out quiet, just died in silence. One that I can think of is Kefka from Final Fantasy VI. But there's not many. And so Thanos is dusted. They won. But then here's the cost. Hulk was able to survive the snapping of the fingers because he's capable of that, because he's the Hulk. Tony is not. That half of his body is completely fried. And you can just feel it coming. You can tell it's coming. Oh, gosh, I'm starting to get choked up just thinking about it. I really did get choked up last night when I saw it the second time, knowing it was coming. And Tony dies. Tony Stark, Iron Man, the man who started it all, self-sacrifices himself to save everyone. And I think that's why Strange never told him. Because if he had, he may not have been willing to go that far. But I partly think the reason he was willing to go that far is because of the conversation with his father. Because when Tony talked to his father told him, there isn't anything I wouldn't do for that little guy. And I think Tony realized, there is nothing I wouldn't do for my little girl. And in that moment, when he had the stones, he thought, there is no way I'm letting this monster near my daughter. And that's why he was willing to snap his fingers. No, more than likely knowing it was going to kill him. But Pepper, she says, it's okay. We're going to be okay now. You can rest now. Tony hasn't been able to rest since 2012. This was explored in Iron Man 3. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't rest. Now he could finally rest. And then we get the epilogue. We see everyone reunited because he did it. He saved everyone. Hulk brought them back with his snap, but he prevented them from getting killed by Thanos with his snap. He made a message for them, as that doesn't surprise me in the least. One, kind of a message you play at your will. There are people I've seen that do this. They make a video message of, well, if you're watching this, it probably means I'm dead. Yeah, that's the kind of message he left for them. Anticipating that the time traveling thing was not going to work out, so he made it just in case. The funeral. There were people I heard just openly crying and sobbing. And everyone was there for his funeral. Pepper had the arc reactor from the first movie, the one that she made as a present for him, that said, "Proof that Tony Stark has a heart." Of course, there were some other people that, of course, are not coming back as well. Black Widow, she's gone. She's not coming back. And Barton was like, I wish she could know. And Scarlet Witch, who, let's remember, her powers come from one of the Infinity Stones, the Scepter, the Mind Stone. And that's another thing. Vision, he's gone. He's not coming back. But because she's connected to the stones, she says she knows. They both know. And I think she was also referring to Gamora. She may have been referring to Vision, but I have a feeling that she was referring to Gamora. Either one, I wouldn't be surprised if she's referring to either one. There's the whole thing about Thor joining the Guardians of the Galaxy. Yeah, I don't necessarily care for that. I think that's kind of weird and odd, but whatever. We'll see how that pans out in Guardians 3. So I'll talk a bit more about, the thank yous and such in a bit. But before I do, there's one last thing to discuss from the movie. Captain America. So, Steve gets the stones and Mjolnir, and he goes back in time to put them all back. They try to bring him back, it doesn't work. And then they look over, and they see an old man just sitting on a bench. And it's Steve. Steve Rogers didn't go back in time, didn't allow himself to be brought back, because he decided to stay and grow old. Live a life. Because he missed out on it. Plus, he was an old soldier who was tired of fighting. And got to retire. He passes the torch to Sam, passing the shield on to him. I thought he was going to pass it to Bucky, but in hindsight, it makes more sense because Bucky is also an old soldier. Bucky, just like Steve, is an old soldier who has passed his time, and I would not be surprised if Bucky now retires and decides to live a life as well. Sam, however, he is not quite an old soldier yet. He's still a ready-to-go, combat-ready soldier, so to speak. And Sam was a huge help to him from Winter Soldier onward. So, in hindsight, it makes more sense he would actually pass that shield on to Sam instead of Bucky. And then we notice Steve has a wedding ring on. Sam goes, "You want to tell me about her?" Now, I knew immediately it was Carter, because who else was he gonna go marry? And Steve goes, No, I don't think I will. And then we see a flashback to that time period where now he finally got his dance, because he and Carter are in what I assume is now their house, because I assume at that point they are now married, they are living together, and they're dancing in the living room. Because he finally got that dance with Carter. And they kiss, and that's how the movie ends. And then they have an awesome curtain call. They list off everyone and all their, that played a character in this important character. And then they showed the original 6 Avengers in the credits with signed signatures from the actors to give them their own spotlight. Let me tell you this right now. Some people got like a little golf clap or something. Like Captain, Chris Evans, he got some claps. But when they showed Robert Downey Jr., the place went nuts and erupted. Woo! They all clapped and cheered. Those who stayed, because some people had already left. But Robert Downey Jr. is definitely the one getting the most cheers, and deservedly so. So, this means that both Robert Downey Jr. and Chris Evans have bowed out. Tony Stark self-sacrificed himself, and Steve Rogers retired. Behind the scenes, this makes complete sense. Chris Evans said he wanted to leave acting and pursue a career in directing. Robert Downey Jr. has kind of made it clear that at some point he was wanting to retire the character and, move on. I don't know if he's going to plan on continuing acting or if he's done. I don't know. I don't know what Robert Downey Jr. plans on doing afterwards, but it doesn't matter. He's earned this. So, yeah, immense thank yous to Robert Downey Jr. Because who would have thought we would have had Iron Man back in 2008 and we would have this now, 11 years later. This was incredible. But there's one other man I want to give immense credit and thank yous to. And I was reminded of this last night when I was watching The Funeral. Because Happy was talking with Tony's daughter, Morgan. Said, "Are you hungry?" "Yes." "What do you want?" "Cheeseburgers." And Happy remembered in the original Iron Man movie where when he first comes back from being captured, he wants an American cheeseburger and then a press conference. And he says, "Your daddy liked cheeseburgers. I'm going to get you all the cheeseburgers you want." Oh, gosh. Oh, that got me just thinking about it. But because of that scene, I want to give an incredible thank you and shout out to him, to that man, Jon Favreau. Because from what I understand, if it wasn't for Jon Favreau, Iron Man, the movie, may never have happened. Because he was dedicated and committed to getting it done and getting it done right with Robert Downey Jr. Robert Downey Jr. deserves immense credit for what he did as Tony Stark. But if it wasn't for Jon Favreau directing the first Iron Man movie, I don't think any of this would have been possible. So, also, obviously, big thank yous to Stan Lee. I think he got what may have been his final cameo in this. Wasn't a standout cameo like I think it was in Captain Marvel, where they had a tribute for him, and then you just see it's just him. It's just him there, and she smiles at him. This one, it's in the 70s, and it's him in a disguise, like with a wig and such, where he's like, there's a bumper sticker on the back that says "Nuff said," and he's like, "Hey, dude, make love, not war." Rest in peace, Stan Lee. And rest in peace, Tony Stark. There are obviously going to be more Marvel movies coming out. Can I just say, screw Sony for what they did with that Spider-Man Far From Home trailer? That was not supposed to be released until now. Because that trailer was an immense spoiler for the movie. Because it immediately told us Peter Parker's back, Nick Fury's back. Oh, and look at that. He has a tough time looking at his Spider-Man suit in his closet. That means Tony Stark died. That's what that told me. I was still, so I somewhat expected it, and yet I still was somewhat surprised by it. Man, they really messed that up. Marvel has even said that trailer was never supposed to come out until, later this week, once people had seen the movie, so they wouldn't, it wouldn't be a spoiler, because that trailer immensely spoiled this movie. Anyway, it's been an hour and 15 minutes. I think it's time to wrap this up. You guys have heard my thoughts on it. Absolutely amazing. Loved it. I can't wait to see it again. Just that Avengers Assemble scene alone is worth it. Just absolutely incredible. So that's my thoughts on Avengers Endgame. Sorry if you got a little tired of looking at this screen here. I got more interested in talking about the movie than about, playing poker and such. So whatever. We'll just go ahead and do this. And I will see you guys next time.